Planning Commission will now be called to order. Mr. Feinstein, may we please have the roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Paul,
Yes, I'm present.
Commissioner Greavy,
Here.
Commissioner Werblin,
Present.
Commissioner Evans. Commissioner Evans had indicated that she may join us via Zoom, so we'll see if she joins a little later. Commissioner Matthews,
Present.
Vice Chairperson Cruzen,
Present.
and Chairperson Childs.
Present. Commissioner Greavy, will you now lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Please join me in the salute to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Persons wishing to address the Planning Commission on subjects not on the agenda, but within the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission, provided that no action may be taken on off-agenda items except as authorized by law. Off-agenda items from the public will be taken under consideration without discussion by the Commission and may be referred to staff. Comments will be accepted in person or via Zoom. Public comment instructions. To speak on an agenda item in person, please complete a speaker's card and give it to the secretary before the meeting or at the latest prior to the time for public comments on that item. When joining on Zoom, please use the raise your hand feature or press 9 on your phone to request to speak. You will be called on by name and will have 3 minutes to speak. And I see here that I have 2 speaker cards for non-agenda items, and the first person will be Maggie McQueen.
Well, I don't know if any of you know me, but I've been in the area since the 80s. And I've gone along with everything, just about, but something's come to my attention, and it's really bothered me. Okay, I brought my kids up in the area. We've had a wonderful time. I live on Walnut Avenue. And as you know, the back of Walnut, we have a new DMV, right? DMV, they said that they would, they wanted to be friends with all us people along Walnut that back on to it. First of all, they took all the ivy, all the flowers, all the old, damaged all the wall that had already been there since, 92 actually, been there, or 82. And that wasn't good enough because they damaged the wall, so they had to go ahead and replace parts of all the neighbors' walls, right? So I was getting a little upset with this because, I don't mind progress. I really like progress. But this was not good enough. I have a neighbor. He wrote me this letter and said that he wants to have this written. Also, I did send for your little planning that told us exactly what it was that you were going to do in that. So in the planning, it said that we were going to get a new wall. It wasn't going to be fiberglass. If anybody's been over there, they know it's about 3 feet of fiberglass, and they were going to paint the bottom of the wall to match the fiberglass, which is blue, which would be nice. But fiberglass, I don't know if anybody knows it, fiberglass gets really hot. When we had 119 or 14 or whatever it was, I touched it. It backs onto my house, it's hot. Apart from that, in your plans, you said that you were going to put a wall on that back of that dealership. That would be the same as any other wall on any other dealership in the area. So my question is, what happened to that plan? That anybody can put up a 3-foot fiberglass wall and expect us to be happy with that. Okay, so you want me to read the chaps? This is a chap that's down the street. He wrote this. To whom it may concern, I'm writing this letter in regards to the construction on the BMW dealership located directly behind our home. We have a few concerns regarding the sound barrier recently installed by the construction crew. When this project first began, they removed all the trees on behind our house, on the sides of the property. As the process continued, I noticed that this damage structurally to the wall, his wall. Our wall began to lean. Soon the wall portion began to fall. The construction crew came over, continued with compacting equipment to solidify the ground of the site, which has caused the wall to shift. I speak with the general contractor in the charge, and he assured us that there would be, this taken care of. Well, it's gone on for several weeks and months now, and nobody's done anything about it. The original plan was for a sound barrier wall, not this steel frame wall with fiberglass panels. Fairfield requires the owners of this product to replace the supporting wall, and they have in place with a sound wall what was originally drawn in your plans. So that's it in a nutshell. So it's up to you guys now. You got anything, comments or anything?
Yeah, so I'll speak on behalf of staff. There are conditions of approval for the project. There are approved plans. If you are able to give us contact information, we'll take a look. We'll go out and do a site visit, and we'll get in touch with you.
Well, that's what Jesse said they'd already done. I talked to Jesse, and they said that you had already done that. At the end of the day, we don't want that fiberglass wall. The people that back onto this dealership, I don't know what they thought about when they put that up.
Yeah. I'll look into it, and if you give me your contact information, I'll be back in touch with you. You can.
And thank you so much for that feedback, Maggie.
You're welcome. Like I say, I've been in this area a long time, and I've never been here to complain anything, but this has really gone too far. Got plenty of money to put a wall up, and in your plans, they actually have the wall in the plans, in the picture.
Okay. Well, we will definitely get back to you. Okay, next on our public comments, we'll hear from Nora Martinez.
And I do speak for all the people that are adjacent to that wall. So I'm 707. My husband's a little hard of hearing, so I may not hear the phone. You may have to call us twice.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
All right.
Hi, I'm Nora Martinez, and I had a question about housing that's substandard. It used to be for dependent at Travis Air Force Base. My information, it could be converted to house all the homeless. I'm not sure if that's correct or not. The other issue I had, please, no more homeless shelters. They are not efficient as far as energy waste goes. People don't turn off the water, they don't turn off the lights. I would like to ask the Planning Commission, what's wrong with having those little villages, and I'm a military widow, and I'm homeless, by the way, and I'm not for HUD housing vouchers either, because people are on it for 40, 50 years, or even generations. They never move out, and there is a lot of corruption involving HUD. What is wrong with using those dilapidated housing at Travis Air Force Base and converting them into housing that the homeless can rent? The homeless are basically excluded because there is a housing monopoly, a monopoly going on with billions of dollars. Accounting heads are homeless, even so they're not in the shelter. They still get the funding. And all they want to do is collect information and surveillance, but where is the housing in Fairfield? I've lived in government housing when I was a military dependent, and some of the housing is substandard, correct, but on the other hand, my opinion is homeless do not respect private property. If it belongs to the government, it belongs to everybody or nobody. So therefore, I used to live in Ellsworth Court, which was totally trashed. From the laundromat to the high crime, it attracted an element that nobody would feel safe living there. I lived there, and Larry Wilson got $5 million from the city, and a lot of the money, just writing checks and giving money to people. Why are the people in tents on the bike trail? Why is there no housing in the plan? Why is the plan so against using public transportation to reach people? We have a problem with the way it's laid out. The cities are now in a circular architectural environment, sort of like Buckminster Fuller, where they're energy self-sufficient, including magnetic generators where you don't have to rely on the grid. I see people all the time charging their vehicles, their EVs. What's the sense of having a car if you got to push it? The other words, Fairfield is way behind as to the quantum mechanic that they teach in physics, going into the eighth dimension. I have these people here who just want their money and exclude everybody, but on the other hand, they've never gone to UC Berkeley, they've never read about Buckminster Fuller. The buildings, the homeless buildings, so to speak, the shelters, should be abolished. It should be defunded. There should be no money gone to one person that claims to be sort of like next to God just because they're religious. Another issue I have, the churches own a lot of properties that's not used, tax them. I'm from Europe, and we have a church tax. If you belong to a church, I don't care what religion you are, you might worship the monarchy. I'm anti-monarchies. We don't need a monarch in Europe, period. Brexit's good for them. 20 palaces. It's not affordable for normal educated people, okay? I just think that pomp and circumstance is out of date. It's outdated. The Romanov people, they were all had a revolutionary Trotsky. What
Yes.
it does, it encourages people
Yes,
to hold
Nora?
a revolution.
If we could get
Yeah,
you to-
that's what it does. Yeah,
we
you
could get
have
you to conclude your-
revolutionaries in Berkeley. The reason they are revolutionaries is because we are starving.
If we could have you to conclude your
Educated people
comments.
are starving. Include us in your planning. Thank you.
Thank you for your feedback.
Goodbye.
Okay. Next is the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda?
And before we do that, I should just point out, we don't have any additional speakers on Zoom, or any people asking to speak on Zoom. So there are no changes proposed to the agenda tonight.
Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I motion to approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
I do too.
It has been moved and seconded to approve the agenda as submitted. We will vote by roll call, Mr. Feinstein. Will you conduct the roll call?
Yes. Commissioner Paul,
Yes.
Commissioner Greavy,
Yes.
Commissioner Werblin,
Yes.
Commissioner Evans.
Yes.
Commissioner Evans is here, okay. Commissioner Matthews,
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Cruzen,
Yes.
and Chairperson Childs.
Yes. Minutes are approved. Next, we'll have the approval of the minutes of the August 24th, 2022 meeting. Are there any changes to the minutes?
Not from staff.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve these minutes?
I motion to approve those minutes.
Is there a second?
I do second.
It has been moved and seconded to approve the minutes as submitted. Mr. Feinstein, will you conduct the roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Paul,
Yes.
Commissioner Greavy,
Yes.
Commissioner Werblin,
Abstain?
Commissioner Evans. Commissioner Evans, are you there?
Abstain?
Commissioner Matthews.
Abstain?
Commissioner Matthews.
Approve.
Vice Chairperson Cruzen
Yes.
and Chairperson Childs.
Yes. Now we're at the public comments section of the meeting, and this is the time for the public to speak on items not on the agenda.
Oops, we've already gone through that. Let's go to the next item.
Scheduled matters.
Yeah.
The next item on the agenda is scheduled matters. For each itemized item, there will be a presentation by city staff. For items that involve application requests, I will then ask the applicant to address the commission if they so desire. Then I will open the comment period via Zoom and in-house. I will close the comment period after all comments have been provided and after all our questions regarding the testimony during the comment period have been answered. After the comment period is closed, the commission will deliberate on the item and may have additional questions for staff. We cannot take additional testimony or questions from the public after the comment period is closed. So our first item for review is the draft of the sixth cycle housing element update. And our staff person is Jesse Hernandez.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Jessie Hernandez, and I'm the city's Associate Planner coordinating the General Plan Update and the sixth cycle housing element. As you know, the city is currently developing the sixth cycle housing element, which plans for the housing needs of Fairfield residents from 2023 to 2031. The draft housing element was published on the General Plan Update website, fairfieldforward.com, on August 23rd, which kicked off a 30-day public review period. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to provide an overview of the draft housing element and to solicit stakeholder input. I'd like to introduce our planning consultant, Allison Moore of Diet and Bhatia, who will present the draft housing element and lead tonight's discussion. Rajiv Bhatia is also present via Zoom to support tonight's meeting. Now I'll pass it over to Allison to begin the presentation.
Good evening, Honorable Chair and Commissioners. My name is Allison Moore, and I am a consultant at Diet and Bhatia. We have been helping with the general plan update and the housing element. I may jump through some of the slides just to, for the flow. But this evening, I'll give an overview of the housing element, a key component of Fairfield Forward 2050, which is the city's general plan update. And then I'll walk you through the housing element requirements, share a few points on Fairfield's housing needs, two of the most important components of the housing element that we'll discuss in further detail are the housing sites inventory and the housing action plan. And then at the end, we're hoping to answer any questions that you might have. So just to give a brief overview of the general plan, as you may recall, the general plan update is the long-range plan for future growth, preservation, and priorities in Fairfield. While the housing element is progressing at a more accelerated rate due to state deadlines, much of the community visioning and big ideas about Fairfield's future have also informed the housing element. Because there are still decisions to be made about land use, including future density categories and land use distribution, the housing element uses those that are already outlined in the current existing general plan. However, there will be other opportunities to consider locations for housing in the future, many of which have been contemplated by the Planning Commission and the Council, and those concepts will be carried forward in the general plan. I'll talk more about that later. There has been a robust amount of community engagement as part of the general plan, including activities that have specifically focused on housing. Of particular note is our website, where we currently have an interactive map viewer of our proposed housing sites, focus group discussions with housing advocates and nonprofit and for-profit developers, a workshop introducing the housing element to the public, online surveys, and focused pop-up outreach in Spanish-speaking communities. Generally, some of the biggest issues that we've heard include addressing homelessness and adding more diverse housing options to the city. Over the general plan's 30-year time horizon, we heard a preference for infill housing with a focus on downtown and more housing along major streets. The public and city council have also discussed major transformation at the Solano Town Center Mall and along North Texas streets as part of this general plan update. So I'm going to skip the timeline and get back to that in just a second. But what is a housing element? It is one of 8 required elements the general plan must address. As Jesse mentioned, it's the blueprint for addressing Fairfield's housing needs for all economic segments of the community over an 8-year period, so a shorter time frame than the 30-year general plan. Over the next 8 years, the city will need to accommodate and plan for 3,069 housing units at all income levels. This future housing need is known as the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA. That number is determined by the state and then distributed regionally. So this number, the 3,069 number, represents Fairfield's fair share of housing for the Solano County subregion. And you can see in the prior cycle, the number has decreased somewhat as we are now in the 6th cycle, which is uncommon among other cities. However, you can see that the percentage of moderate, lower, and very low income housing need has increased. As identified in the Housing Accomplishments chapter of the housing element, for Cycle 5, Fairfield greatly exceeded permitting for above moderate and made great progress on moderate housing, but there was still a significant shortfall of very low and lower income units. Thus, this housing element emphasizes strategies to streamline and make it easier to build affordable housing. There are 3 major parts to a housing element. The first part is the background information, the analysis. That includes an assessment of what worked well in the last cycle that should be carried forward, as well as what things should be changed. An assessment of housing needs and trends, including affordability, housing quality, needs of specific groups, including Fairfield's unhoused population, people with disabilities, larger families, and more. And the background analysis also seeks to make sure that Fairfield residents have fair housing choices. That means no matter who you are, you can seek and secure housing fairly no matter where it is in the city. The second part is the sites inventory. That includes locations of where Fairfield will plan for this housing at all economic levels. And the action plan, one of the most important parts, is where the city commits to doing what it needs to do to address known constraints or barriers and facilitate housing. So in essence, the housing element must do 2 things. It must plan for adequate housing sites and set forth strategies, programs, and actions to meet housing needs. That's the needs of the RHNA, that number specified, as well as the needs of the people. So I'm going to go back to our timeline. So as Jesse mentioned, the draft was made available on August 22nd. The 30-day review period will end on September 22nd. And I do just want to note that the housing element is on an aggressive timeline. So after that public review period that ends on September 22nd, the team will have 10 days to incorporate all of the public input that we received and from you all tonight before sending to the Department of Housing and Community Development on October 4th. HCD then has 90 days to review and provide written direction on what things the housing element must change or address to receive certification. The team will then make these changes and then send to council and HCD for adoption and certification consideration in January. The statutory deadline for the housing element is January 31st, but there is a grace period in which any further changes required by HCD can be discussed and incorporated. Okay. And so I mentioned that aggressive timeline. There are also consequences to not meeting that timeline and not having a certified housing element. It is extremely important. If the city does not meet this timeline and have a certified housing element, there are sweeping consequences. Without a certified housing element, the city is subject to fees and fines the city must pay to the California State Housing Trust Fund and attorney fees. Courts may issue a moratorium on all permits until a housing element is certified. Importantly, the city becomes ineligible for a variety of state funds, including bonds, grants, and loans that are key for planning and funding actions that support more affordable housing. This includes SB2 planning funding, the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, and others. And then finally, without a certified element, the city then must approve any proposed housing development with 20% or more of its units that are affordable to moderate, low, and extremely low incomes, no matter what its zoning or general plan designation is. So having a certified housing element is extremely important in being able to have that local control. One important component to the housing element is affirmatively furthering fair housing. State law requires that housing elements show how housing locations affirmatively further fair housing by overcoming patterns of segregation and fostering inclusive communities. We've seen in review of other housing elements, HCD comment letters in our own experience on other housing elements, that this is one of the biggest areas of scrutiny for HCD. To show that cities are affirmatively furthering fair housing, HCD will look for a few things. They will want to see that the element distributes housing so that there is not an overconcentration of low or high income housing in the city. So sites should be equitably distributed. And two, they will want to see how lower income sites are identified in areas of greater opportunity. Areas of opportunity is a state-defined methodology and requirement of analysis that maps census tracts based on some of the following factors: economic, environmental, and education. And the idea behind these maps, this map is the opportunity areas shown here. The more moderately resourced tracts are in the light pink, and the lower resource tracts are in the brown. These are supposed to be areas whose characteristics have been shown by research to support positive economic, educational, and health outcomes for low-income families, particularly long-term outcomes for children. So I'll share a little bit more about housing needs that came up as we developed our assessment. Homeownership and rental costs are increasingly becoming unaffordable. We've seen that in the data, and we've heard that from community members. Over 70% of Fairfield's housing stock currently is detached single family, and there are significant opportunities to add more multifamily housing to the city's stock to address needs of larger families, renters, younger people, single people, the like. And then finally, there are special needs for Fairfield's unhoused, farm worker community, and military employees who have limited incomes. Some of the biggest challenges to addressing these issues include the following. Affordable housing and land is expensive and challenging to build and assemble funding for. Currently, Fairfield's overall residential density categories skew at a lower range than what the state defines as the default density of 30 dwelling units per acre. I'll get back to that in just a second. And the areas where the current residential zoning and density patterns accommodate higher densities are limited, with the exception of our specific plan areas. And these represent a significant opportunity and where we have located quite a number of housing sites. There are also some parts of Fairfield where there are significant environmental constraints like floodplains, earthquake faults, and wildfire threat. And I will mention too that when we talk about areas of opportunity, even though that brown area that you saw is extensive, the specific plan areas are where the city is investing significant time and energy and focus in the hope that there can be more economic opportunity and more housing in those areas. So now we'll spend some time with the sites inventory. That is an inventory of land that is suitable for residential development by the various RHNA income categories. And just because a site is identified doesn't mean the city has to build, just that it has to plan for it. HCD also includes requirements for lower income sites, which I'll describe. The big one that I'm coming back to is the default density of 30 dwelling units per acre. They want to make sure that sites that we identify in the inventory can accommodate that in their range. They need to be on parcels of land that are between 0.5 and 10 acres. They should not be located in a hazard zone, and they should seek to distribute lower income sites equitably across the city as well. So I'll walk you through the process of how we identified sites. It builds on different steps. So first, we took our pipeline projects. Those are those that have been approved or are already under construction and will be ready for occupancy after July 2022. Our pipeline units and sites that are also included as credits, they're called arena credits, are accessory dwelling unit projections based on past housing trends. And I will note that Fairfield already has a lot of housing planned in our pipeline, over 3,000 units, and 500 of those are for low, very low, and extremely low incomes. So we're starting at a good place. Next, we looked for vacant sites with zoning designations that accommodate housing. Our lower income sites needed to meet the criteria that I mentioned, but vacant sites are kind of the next step because this will be where it will be easier to build housing. Much of this vacant land was in the train station specific plan. Then we looked for underutilized sites with existing zoning for housing. Underutilized sites are those where the value of the land may be greater than the building or where there is a low floor area ratio, so a lot of land and a smaller building footprint. Those may provide more of an incentive for developers to redevelop, or for property owners to redevelop rather. And then from there, we adjusted what their realistic capacity might be to account for that likelihood of redevelopment. And this is what our distribution of sites looked like. This is our housing sites inventory map available at the Fairfield Forward website. So equitably distributing lower income sites in more moderately resourced areas was a challenging exercise. Each of these areas in the salmon color, have certain constraints. So up here in the northwest corner, this is an area that is marked for conservation and part of the green belt, right, Dave? Okay. And then sites down here are part of the train station specific plan, so those are accounted for. This area up here has steep slopes, no vacant land, and there's also threat of utility wildfire hazard. And then in Cordelia, we also have some fault lines that need to be considered as well. So because Cordelia is moderately resourced with a larger number of vacant parcels, the city must show attempts to locate lower income housing sites there. The distribution of all the vacant sites shown in Cordelia is shown above. These are mostly zoned for industrial or for commercial or office uses. In Cordelia, there were 3 sites that we identified to affirmatively further fair housing, representing 8% of the allocation number of 3,069. We did hear at the Cordelia Visioning Workshop that there are concerns about adding more housing in the area, surrounding adequacy of city services, school planning, lack of commercial, parks, and traffic. And we heard that message loud and clear. And we took that into consideration for sites in this area as we balanced those concerns over the need to show that we are equitably distributing housing. There are a number of parcels, as shown on this map, that we did not include, so as to allow room for this type of land use planning to occur as part of a more comprehensive general plan update process. I also just want to address North Texas Solano Town Center, which we know are big opportunity areas envisioned for mixed-use housing. And I will note that HCD will want to see housing that could feasibly develop in the 8-year period. While these still remain great areas for exploration, there are a number of factors that could make the 8-year period challenging, and they would face extra scrutiny. For example, the mall has many tenants. There could be desire as part of the general plan update to more thoughtfully plan for other types of uses in tandem with housing at this envisioned community hub. And then while we do have a larger site at North Texas in the inventory now, development could be made more feasible along here with a more comprehensive approach to this area as well, considering transportation needs, what commercial looks like in tandem as well. So while the team made its best effort to balance community concerns and equitable distribution in Cordelia, we put forth what we believe to be the most appropriate sites. There is another potential option that Planning Commission could consider tonight. This is some land south of 80 and east of 680 that could be an alternative to some of the Cordelia sites to the north. But I will note that this site does have some things to consider. It is currently partially in a floodplain, though that does not preclude development on all of the sites in this area. And because it is a smaller acreage than the sites we had identified in the north, to make it equivalent, it would require a zoning change and additional density over 32 dwelling units per acre to meet that, to be an equivalent capacity.
I apologize to the chair, but when you indicate on some of the maps exactly what part of Cordelia you're, because I can't figure it out and I live there.
Sure.
Is it possible you can hold those comments till we get to that point?
Well, that's fine, but I apologize, sir, but when I don't even know where those are. So just so that I have it in my head, that's all I'm asking.
I'm happy during the discussion to pull up our interactive map so we can show exactly if that would be of desire to the chair. Okay, and then lastly, our housing action plan. This describes how the city will address constraints, affirmatively further fair housing, and support unique needs of residents. Notably, the action plan contains several programs which may include specific actions that also have quantified objectives and timelines for implementation. These are components that HCD will want to see. And here is a summary of what the action plan contains. A few I want to highlight are the affordable housing strategy, which includes an action to study an inclusionary housing ordinance or an in lieu fee, development incentives, assistance and streamlining that help make it easier for developers to build affordable housing, as well as produce more diverse housing types, zoning code changes that affirmatively further fair housing and promote smaller unit types that are more affordable by design, and that also can promote other smaller housing types. And then also our zoning changes that support populations with special needs and housing to meet their needs too. So with that, I will turn it back over to you all for questions, and then we can come back, and I'm hoping that we can discuss two questions. Do you have any questions? And then is there anything in the draft housing element that needs to be changed or refined? Thank you.
And we'll also have time within there for the public to provide any input as well.
Thank you so much for that presentation. And now I'm going to ask any of the commission staff, do they have any questions or comments for the staff or the consultants?
I actually have a question, if you can hear me okay?
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Great presentation. It really broke it down where it was easy to understand. I'm not sure if maybe I missed something, but did we identify any spots along that more like infill? I'm just kind of not sure about that part.
Yes, I would say that most of the housing sites that we identified are infill, and I can pull up the live map after public comment, but there are a number of sites along West Texas that would be infill. I think most of the vacant land actually occurs in the train station specific plan. But most of our sites are infill, they are within city limits.
you taking comments from the public?
Okay, I was trying to clarify that because I know like earlier in the report, it did say about, having, I guess there was some concern about having more housing available on main streets and stuff like that. And so I just wanted to see if something I know it's difficult to identify something off of North Texas and that whole area, but it would be nice to have some more infill that way as well. Thank you.
Any other commissioners?
Yes, good evening. There was a slide where you had, I think it was referring to North Cordelia, and you said that we had to have greater than 32 32 dwelling units per acre, and regularly it's 30 dwelling. Can you find that slide and just kind of explain?
Sure, that was our alternative site for consideration?
Yes, that fourth bullet point, please. Thank
Right.
you.
So the 3 sites that we identified in northern Cordelia, these ones here, they are up by Solano College. This one abuts the college. This one, the corner of Business Center Drive and Sassoon Valley Road. The number of housing units at these 3 is 257 units. I would need to look back at my notes for the total acreage. It does say in the site's inventory. But the acreage of this alternative parcel for consideration, which is down here, is less than the total acreage of the parcels to the north. So if we did want to have an equivalent number of units resulting from the alternative site, the density of that site would need to be greater than 32.
Okay, so I was thinking it was in conjunction with, but this is.
This is
Either
a
or.
choice that could be.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I have a question regarding, we talk about how we're going to get our affordable housing. And it seems, I've done a little bit of research, and it looks like a requirement that is put on builders in some areas is roughly 10% that we say, okay, as an example, you're going to build 100 moderate to above moderate home prices. In order to do that, you're going to have to put in 10 low income or very low income homes as well. Do we have the ability to put that into this plan?
So our Housing Action 1.2, and perhaps I can pull up the action plan. Is that a possibility? I think I see it. It includes an action that relates to the study of an inclusionary program, whether that be actually requiring the units or establishing some type of in lieu fee. But to do that first, the city would need to conduct a nexus study to determine what those fees might be, and perhaps the council could, if they have any other input on that. But I can find where that is. And this would also.
Hi, this is Rajiv Bhatia.
Oh.
This is on page 179, and we do call for that process to be completed within 2 years of adoption of the housing element.
So to answer your question, Commissioner Grieve, there is an action in the action plan that further explores what an inclusionary housing policy might look like.
Okay, thank you. One more question. 32 units per acre. How are we achieving that? What are we going to have to go to 5 stories, or how are we going to get 32 units on 1 acre of land?
So to give you a sense of what a 32-unit project might look like, if you've been out to the One Lake neighborhood, there's some new apartments that were built there. Those are about 34 units to the acre. So those are 4 stories, a little over 32. So that gives you a sense of what roughly a 32-unit per acre project might look like.
Thank you.
Any other commissioners? I just had one question myself. On that housing action plan, you outlined several priorities. Are they gonna try to capture all of those, or are there like 2 or 3 of the top 3 they're gonna try to hit? So what's the game plan?
Yeah, so in the Housing Action Plan, there are timeframes established for each of the actions that kind of say that the city should prioritize this action in this period of time. Others might take a little bit longer. So there is that consideration for timing built into the action plan.
Thank you. Any other commissioners before we go to public comment? Okay.
I do have a,
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
sorry. In reviewing this, and I think there's, 7 action plans, and then there's bullet points under there. Are these action plans things that the city are already approved? Or is this your action plan, you're asking the city, this is what we would like to do? Because reading some of it, there was lots of encouraging and versus quantitative type information. And, I'm going to use we hope for an example. It's not verbatim in there. So I was just trying to understand the details of that and if this is approved or not. If you could talk a little bit about that, please.
Sure. So some of the actions in the action plan are carried forward from the prior housing element. That's why those are included. And then we did try to be specific about what the quantified objective would be, but I think for some of the actions that do require, let's say, coordination with other agencies, those would have likely less of softer language like you're describing. But if there are actions that that you see in there that you think should be stronger, we'd be glad to discuss those tonight.
And I should note that many of the actions that are carryover, sort of ongoing, a lot of them are programs that are being undertaken by our housing department here in the city, and the staff for our housing department have reviewed this draft and provided their input. So if there are programs that are recommended to continue, or even programs that are recommended to be new, our housing department has looked at that and concurs that those are good recommendations.
Any other commissioners?
I had a question. Can you go back to the slide where it showed low income, moderate income? So is that what we're proposing, to better understand, is that what we're proposing those specific housing would be built? And if so, what are the criteria and why we chose that's where we're going to build medium income, low income?
Right, so I will go to this slide. This shows the number of units that Fairfield has to plan for each of the income categories. There are specific site requirements that HCD has for low, very low, and extremely low income sites. They have to be a certain size, they have to be a certain density, they can't be in a hazard area. The other sites, we have a little bit more leeway.
Yeah.
And so, when we're looking at our map, we started from the distribution of projects that are already approved. There is a map in the housing element that shows where those pipeline projects are versus ones that we were considering. The second step was to identify where the vacant land was that had existing zoning and density that could accommodate housing. So we do a screen of that, and then those are most likely carried forward because they'll be easier to develop. And then for the above moderate, Fairfield already met its above moderate allocation with the pipeline projects. That's why you're not seeing on the other map other housing sites that are for above moderate, because those were already taken care of. So really our task for the sites inventory was locating the low and moderate income sites throughout the city.
So aside from, I don't think I'm asking my question correctly, and I apologize.
Yeah.
So I understand, of course, there's some criteria that you have to, it can't be near hazardous, and it has to be a certain acreage. I was just curious as to this, and I know you're limited with whatever available land you have. I was just curious, like, why did we choose, or why did you guys propose to have low-income housing there? I'm only thinking because as low-income families, wouldn't you want to build houses near available resources, like closer to schools, or even, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Those were definitely considerations that we took into account when planning for sites here.
Yeah, Commissioner, I would also add that, we had a variety of criteria. Proximity to transit, proximity to parks was another one. Distributing the sites as a city looks for, in different parts of the city was another one. But a point to remember is that these are all privately owned sites. There is no compulsion on part of a property owner to actually develop low-income housing on these sites. It's entirely possible somebody may build even at 30 units per acre, but it may not be income restricted. And that's the reason why we have a buffer. We're shooting for at least a 15% buffer, so we don't run out of housing sites in any income category. We are just setting the stage for the market to be able to respond appropriately to the program that we have established, but we cannot really twist anyone's arms to be building, subsidized housing if they don't really want to do that. Yeah. So, but they do have certain streamlining abilities. If here is a site that we've identified for low income, you want to build it, you're able to navigate the city's permitting process a lot easier with that, through this process.
Thank you.
Can I also ask a clarifying question with looking at the low and the moderate income? Are those dwellings proposed to have market rate as well as low and moderate, or just low and moderate incomes?
So the way what happens is that, I don't want to go back in history. At one time, cities had redevelopment monies and cities had actual monies to commit to be providing affordable housing. And since those monies have disappeared with the demise of redevelopment in California, the state is now allowing cities to use what are called default densities. So they assume if you permit, in the case of Fairfield, 30 plus units per acre, that is presumed to be housing that will be affordable at the end of the day. So what we are showing are all of these sites that are low and very low have density that allows somebody to build at 30 units per acre. Whether that housing comes out to be a market rate or affordable is really left up to the project, developer or the property owner.
So it doesn't preclude a mixed-use project, like a mixed income project still could occur. And as Rajiv mentioned, the buffer that we have would allow the city to keep track of how many low-income units could still be on other sites.
And the
Yes,
exercise,
I got a
the
question.
exercise before us here is not necessarily to impose affordability on these sites. Our exercise is to make sure that we have sites that the state, based on their criteria, look at and say, these are viable sites for an affordable project to come in. If it meets that density in the state's eyes, it's a viable site. So our exercise here is to identify sites that kind of a density can be applied to.
Yeah, and to add to what Dave just said, we have a new state law that requires us to maintain that capacity throughout the duration of the housing element. And that's another reason for us to have the buffer. So if we do end up having several projects that don't come out to be affordable at the end of the day, and if you run out of that income category sites, then we need to rezone other sites for the lower income category. And that's another reason why, as one of the commissioners previously suggested, inclusionary housing, that's another way for us to ensure that we are actually delivering on affordable housing at the end of the day. So that's a program you definitely, want to be looking into down the road once the housing element is adopted.
I do have a question. In the past few days, through emails, we have received maybe 8 to 10 public comments. I don't know whether any public is appearing today to press on those things. And what I see that there have been asking about the infrastructure like the schools, parks, and the retail centers. Are we considering any of those points raised by them in our plan?
So I will go to our slide about how we picked our Cordelia sites, but before that, I do just want to state again that we did hear very clearly about these concerns at the Cordelia workshop from other public comments. And these issues are more appropriately addressed as part of the general plan update, which will include transportation, which will include infrastructure, land use planning, perhaps working with the school district to identify additional land for schools. So all of those issues will be addressed as part of the general plan process.
Thank you.
And
go ahead, David.
one thing to add is, ideally, you are putting together your housing element, the rest of your general plan all together, same time frame. One is informing the other as you're working together. Because of the Corks Estate law that says there's a time frame by which we must do this, unfortunately, that puts us in a position of having to identify the sites up front before we get into the facility planning things that we do with the general plan. What we'd be doing here is the decisions that ultimately get made as a part of the housing element, we would take that as informing the general plan as to what we need for this area. We've determined that we've got these housing sites, we have existing needs, we have existing housing. It all builds together. This becomes input and information as we make decisions with our general plan.
Thank you.
And that'll be happening in much more detail, after the once we move into next year.
Thank you, commissioners, for your feedback. And now I'm going to open it up for the public comment period. And I have identified 3 speaker cards, and I also want to see, do we have any speakers via Zoom?
At the moment, we don't have any speakers via Zoom. If there's anybody out there who would like to speak, I think it's press 9, I think, is the way that you do that.
Okay. Oh, to Zoom?
Oh, okay.
Oh.
They're not showing on my screen
Okay.
here. So, okay.
I'm going to go to my first green card speaker, and then we'll have a Zoom, so I'm going to intersperse between the two. And that's Nora Dizan. Am I saying it right?
Good evening. Thank you for having us, or allowing us to make comments on this. One of the key things that I think you may be missing, especially in the term equitable distribution, is that the train-specific plan was really nicely done. It was well thought out. They've got the very nice infrastructure already in. They had plans for retail, et cetera, to support the community out there. That didn't happen in our area. It's a hodgepodge. We've got Rodriguez High School built in 2001, and Red Top Road is still one lane on, it's a 2-lane and one on each side, comes to a full stop. It's always a nightmare over there. The planning has just not been the same in Cordelia. So to use the word equitable is just completely wrong. Our area simply cannot accommodate this type of additional high-density housing because we're already struggling with what we have right now. And we've got also a county plan that's coming, where right now it appears to be approximately 400 units that will be starting. And how will we have schools to support that? We just don't have it. This change where the city now may be supplying utilities, sewer, water, it will also be an instrument to be used by other developers who have just been waiting for this change So we're going to see more in the rural areas close to our, hitting the Cordelia area. So it is extremely wrong to use the word equitable. I suggest that anything like this be put in the train-specific area, because that, like I say, is masterfully planned. I drove over that overpass. I'm going, wow, this is just the opposite of Cordelia. We truly cannot accommodate this in our area. Our place is just compacted, and too many other plans are coming down the pipe that are going to impact, that are going to put a strain on our infrastructure, and the schools are not there. There are no new schools that are planned. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Nora. And now we're going to go to our first Zoom speaker.
This is Backtran.
Is there anyone on Zoom?
Good evening. Can you hear?
Yes.
Hi, this is Park Trang. I'm the owner of the former Sears building in Salada Mall. I'm not so sure that with the 8.6 acres, is it included in the housing element? If not, could it be included? Or the city has a separate plan for that area? That's the question.
Can you restate that?
Okay. I own the Sears building in Salada Mall. It's on 8.6 acres. Is it included into the housing element this time? If not, can it be included? Or the city has separate plan for the area at the later time?
Yes.
He owns the Sears building at the mall, and he wants that included in the housing element, but this is about the North Cordelia housing section of the housing element, not around the mall.
The speaker on Zoom, did you hear that clarification? This has to do with Cordelia and not the Sears building at the mall.
Yeah, actually, the discussion in general is citywide. It's not specifically focused on Cordelia. So if folks have comments about things they'd like to be included in the housing element that are outside of Cordelia, that is an appropriate comment for tonight. So it sounds like this speaker would like the mall considered as a part of this. And we can talk about that after public comments.
Thanks, Mr. Feinstein, for that clarification.
Wait, can I make a comment? The volume for the Zoom speakers is very low tonight. I don't know if that's something that our wonderful technical team can address. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be George Kennedy.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. I tend to wobble this. So a couple things. My name is George Kennedy. I'm from Cordelia, Green Valley area, and I have been for over 32 years. A couple things that upset me about this is, and I've been talking to council about this, is transparency and accountability. If you can bring up this couple slides for me, please. One of the things that isn't being shown up here, and I know it's about the housing element, but there's a lot happening in Cordelia, Green Valley, in the 680 and Interstate 80 corridor. And I had asked at the last time this was brought up in this council chamber with the council is, keep going, with the purple, right there. If you look on the plane here, and I don't have a pointer, but where the fire station is presently, and going around Rodriguez High School and through all that industrial complex, that is where STA and the feds, they're going to redo the interchange there. And so there's going to be a displacement of about 24 businesses through there. So a lot of this purple land there isn't developable because it's going to be taken over by the state and the feds to build this. And I had asked for an overlay to show the STA plans that are on their site to overlay this so you can really see what is going to be happening in the future there. What is going to happen to those 24 businesses that have to be relocated? If you take existing industrial commercial land in the Cordelia area, where are those 24 businesses going to be relocated to? Number one. Also, with the RENA, with the Spanos property on Sassoon Valley Road, is that in this element or the last element, since they're not occupied yet and hasn't received a formal notifications? Correct. So displacing these businesses is paramount, so they will stay in Fairfield, because as businesses, they pay taxes, and they pay more taxes than residential, and they use less police, fire services. So having this, it's absolutely wrong to come into the area and say, okay, let's take industrial land and make it into housing. But yet we're going to take industrial land that's already existing, and we're going to take that away, but we're not going to give them any land to rebuild those businesses. And so it's inherent that can we just put a slowdown on the housing element for that area? It's already overburdened. We have all these extra plans. We have a westbound truck scales for the CHP that's going to be redone, and that's going to take land out of that area as well. And you've got all these little things. We have a terrible, absolutely horrific way to go from Sassoon Valley Road to get onto Interstate 80 down there. It goes through one intersection at Business Center Drive in Green Valley. So until the state comes up with plans with the next elements, you're putting multiple carts before a single horse, because a lot of those dominoes are going to fall, and that's when, years down the road, that's when you need to properly look at redeveloping or rezoning some of these locations. But now it's not the right time, because there's way too much that's going to be happening in the future in that area that's going to make it even worse for us. So thank you very much. You guys have a great evening. Oh, yeah. The numbers on the housing, if you could bring those up real quick.
The RENA allocation?
Yeah, the 3069. Now, so I know in the sixth cycle, I know I'm not, a math graduate, but 792, 464, 5,539, and 1274 does not equal 3,069. So that's about
Forgive me, there's a typo.
So if we can, show some proper math. Thank you.
Should be 539, forgive me.
Thank you, George. If we can hear from our next Zoom speaker.
This is Quentin Voice.
Okay, then I'm going to move to our next card speaker, and that's Joseph Green Heffern.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Joe Green Heffern. I live in the North Cordelia area, and I'm the vice president of the Turnstone Homeowners Association. That includes 145 medium-density homes just north of West America Bank. This is adjacent to where the draft housing element proposes converting the 3 vacant commercial industrial parcels for high-density housing. You may have read my recent letter to the editor in the Daily Republic last weekend. It advocates putting a moratorium in place on any new housing in the North Cordelia area until the city has a clear plan to fill a gap of what's already missing for existing residents, let alone to meet the needs of the added housing. The city must first identify and zone any remaining vacant or underutilized sites needed to fill school, park, grocery, and neighborhood retail gaps before adding any new housing. In making this recommendation, I ask you to consider the following 4 facts. All of the housing added in the past 20 years east of Green Valley Road, including 4 single-family subdivisions, all the apartments along Business Center Drive have been built without the addition of any neighborhood services. So basically, nothing has gone in to support all the housing built in the North Cordelia area in the last 20 years. Most of these units were on land previously zoned commercial or industrial. There are no grocery stores, neighborhood retail, parks, or elementary schools within 1 to 2 miles of all these homes in the last 20 years, and certainly not within the 1/2 to 1 mile desired walking distance for higher density apartment dwellers. In addition, what services do exist are on the other side of Green Valley Road or on the other side of Interstate 80, where you can't even as a pedestrian cross Interstate 80 on Sassoon Valley Road. For the past 20 years, the city has catered to owners of vacant commercial properties at the expense of existing and future residents in North Cordelia by allowing haphazard development without preserving land for neighborhood services and amenities. Every lot that gets converted to housing, warehouses, means a lot that cannot be converted to a school, park, grocery store. There aren't many sites left. The current draft housing element continues this trend by targeting some of the few remaining parcels for high-density housing before the general update plan has confirmed where those neighborhood services really should be built. So let me say it clearly, no more rezoning for housing in North Cordelia until you have identified where and when to build the park, school, grocery, and other retail services that are already missing. If you haven't figured out where to locate the missing neighborhood services and amenities over the past 20 years, then now is the time to do so. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
And we do have a speaker on Zoom. We were having some technical difficulties. Let's see if we can bring that person up.
Okay, we're now ready for our Zoom speaker.
This is Quentin Voice.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I couldn't unmute on my side. There we go. All right, so thank you for having me. My name is Quentin Boyce. I'm just speaking on my own behalf. I'm a Fairfield resident. I just wanted to firstly thank you caught the typo that was driving me crazy watching at home. But I actually totally understand the reasoning for these sites. It makes a lot of sense for them. Similar to some of the other concerns that have been shared, is just the timing of putting this in the next 8 years when the timing for the Sassoon Valley Road and Pittman overpass updates are still much further out than that. People still currently cross on foot that very dangerous no pedestrian overpass. And so putting high density and low income housing would really exacerbate that really dangerous overpass between Sassoon Valley Road and Pittman. And so I just wonder, I understand the logic of these locations. So I just wonder if there's any way to I know this is not the general plan, but to clarify that there needs to be some infrastructure to that safety before to go along with these housing.
Thank you. Does staff have any questions?
Not questions, but we do have some response to a few of the items that came up. First of all, I do want to address this particular graphic in the purple areas. There were comments about concerns about the interchange project coming in that's going to wipe out a lot of the purple vacant, or a lot of the industrial, and a lot of those purple areas there that you see. Those are actually labeled as industrial designated land. The housing element before you tonight, the proposed sites, none of the industrial properties that are in purple here, with the exception of the one little one up by the college, right next to the college property, are proposed for any housing, and none down where the interchange is. So there's no changes proposed as a part of this project for that. The other comment, I think I'd reiterate a comment I made before. Housing that's being proposed as a part of this is, it's on a schedule directed by the state that we do have to take action by the end of January on this. So this is a draft for comment that will then go back to HCD or at the state for them to preliminary look at, provide any initial comments to us. Then it'll come back to Planning Commission and the City Council, but it's on a schedule being driven by the state. So we do have to at least consider, the possibility of any potential rezonings in Cordelia now to meet that deadline. If we do propose rezonings, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment, again, because we've had to divorce the housing element timeline from the general plan, this then clearly creates information for knowing what kinds of services and where those are best located. We have a lot of information already. We've talked, we've had workshop with the residents out there. We've heard loud and clear, and we're hearing loud and clear tonight about the need for those services. This is just one more piece of information that helps us figure that out. We recognize that by proposing rezonings for specific sites, it does limit us as to where those can go. But as you can see, there's lots of vacant land scattered throughout, so it doesn't take away all of our options. It leaves many options still on the table. The other thing, just with the question of should we or shouldn't we in Cordelia, again, the reason that it's proposed here as a part of the draft is that there are no sites in Cordelia that we can show HCD currently that have the zoning to satisfy the idea that you are distributing housing throughout the city at different affordability. So the basic idea here is that because there isn't anything at all proposed, there's the call tonight not to do any changes, there aren't any sites at all tonight that are currently zoned to satisfy the state's desire that we distribute that affordability throughout the city. So the proposal is being done not to burden Cordelia and not to ignore their calls for more services and things like that. It's to recognize the fact that there really aren't any sites right now at all that provide for the higher density, for the affordability that are vacant right now. So with that.
Just one more comment on the timing too. I think Allison was smart to bring up in her presentation, there are consequences if we miss this deadline legally, potential litigation, and also the situation where we lose local zoning control over units that propose a certain percentage of affordable units to be included within them. And so without certifying this housing element, there could be a situation that arises where council, your commission, is not able to provide input on projects that go forward and will exacerbate those service concerns that exist in these areas already.
So that's the basis of staff's recommendation of why sites are being proposed. And there is there's an alternate site as well to consider. But ultimately, the commission, you all can provide your own input on what you think is the appropriate course.
Chair, I'd like to make a couple of comments if I could, please.
Yes, because we're going to close the public comment period, and now we're going to open it up to the commissioners for their feedback. So yes, proceed.
So, first of all, Mr. Feinstein, could you clarify, if a project were actually to be proposed in any of these areas, it would still have to go through the commission for approval. Is that not correct?
Under our current, shall we say, regulations, that is correct. Building off the comments from the city attorney and following on comments from Allison earlier, if our housing element is not certified, then there is the potential that we lose some of that control. But if we prepare a housing element that gets certified by the state, we will retain full control to apply our own zoning and to run those projects through an entitlement process. Currently, if they're over, I think, 25 units, they do come before the Planning Commission. If they're a permitted use, you're looking at the site design, environmental impacts. If there's a use permit involved, then you debate whether or not that particular density is appropriate. So yes, so currently and looking forward, we expect and we hope to get certified, you would retain the full authority as the Planning Commission in entitling these projects down the road.
So the point that I'd like to make or emphasize is this is sort of an allocation exercise. It's not an approval exercise. So therefore, given the caveats that you just mentioned, this is not saying those projects will be built in Cordelia. It's just that they may be. And at the time that there is a developer with a project that meets the criteria, then it will be considered by the commission and city council. And so I think that's an important element. Number two, I want to emphasize, if you want grocery stores, if you want convenient retail, you have to have housing units. There's not sufficient in the area now to justify additional grocery. So you can't ask for retail without having housing. And I think that's an important element. And then number three, I want to emphasize we do need, and it's beyond the purview of Fairfield City, but address some kind of pedestrian crossover. I personally have tried to walk that, and it is a very frightening exercise. So crossing over 80 from Green Valley to the other side of 80 is a nightmare. And again, it's beyond the purview of what we're talking about here, but because there have been comments about that, I want to add my personal anecdotal experience that that's not an acceptable condition for what we have to deal with, and especially with those new Spanos developments. I'm sure there's going to be much more going on. So those are my comments for tonight.
Thank you so much. Any other commissioners? Okay.
Can we actually have Mr. Feinstein speak to the portion about the Solano Mall? Because I know that that was brought up as a potential space, but there are also some issues because we don't quite know where that, what direction the property is heading to within the 8 years. But if we could just clarify, like what we kind of looked at tonight, if we can review that part again, because it was in the report, and then we had a speaker that I think wanted some clarity to know like what may be considered within that particular project, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. And Allison touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'll build on that. So the City Council has actually looked from an alternative standpoint at various alternatives for the central part of the city. And in reviewing the alternatives component of our general plan project, did give direction that they would like to see some substantial redevelopment or new development within the mall area, including greater mixture of uses and housing. Typically, we would expect the housing in a fairly dense development like the mall to be fairly dense and probably at the level of density that we're talking about for satisfying affordability for the state. We have quite a few sites already in the very central part of the city that are shown in our housing element. And at the same time, because this will involve redevelopment, working with multiple landowners of that mall, there's the thought that the state, if we were to push more units as a part of our housing element right now on the mall, that the state might not accept that, figuring that because this is an 8-year plan for our housing element, that's perhaps more of a longer term kind of a proposal. At the same time, we want to make sure we're not proposing too many sites, because there are actually penalties potentially if you include sites in this housing element that aren't built, and then we come back at a future housing element, we lose some flexibility with the state. So we want to be careful not to show too many sites up front, and this is a great one. We'll certainly address it further as a part of our general plan. We have direction from the City Council to do that, and then very likely it gets included in the next 8-year housing element down the road.
Thank you for clarifying that, because I really do like the idea of more housing in that area. And then again, as I said earlier, with the North Texas area, I think it is a great idea to start looking at a lot of infill and in the areas that do have vacant lands. I understand that there's an issue with some of it being private property. And I'm just really hoping that that's something that we can overcome, especially for the West Texas area and North Texas areas. That's all. Thank you.
Do we have any other commissioner feedback?
I just think I want to make it clear to those folks in Cordelia that it didn't fall on deaf ears. I think we all agree that maybe the planning there hasn't been as good as it could have been. And yet we do need to respond to this tonight in a positive manner. And you'll just have to take our assurances that you're not going to get run over.
Okay. Any other commissioner feedback? That will wrap up our discussion on the housing element at this time. Okay, now the next on the agenda, we're going to have our director's report. Mr. Feinstein.
Yeah, one main item to report, but I do, just a closing comment, we've heard loud and clear about Cordelia, and we definitely look forward to working more with the commission, members of the public, as a part of the general plan process in addressing a lot of these issues. We definitely have heard there's lots of concerns and issues, and so we want to make sure it's through the general plan that we address those items. So director's report, we do have multiple items coming forth for your next meeting. We are going to have, every year we bring forth at least one time during the year a set of amendments to our zoning ordinance. We find our zoning ordinance is a pretty thick document. We find minor little changes that are, or corrections or edits that need to be made, so we'll have that item for you at your next meeting, as well as a townhome project in the east central part of the city will be coming before you. So we've got those items. Should also note we have one vacancy on our staff, and we're working to fill that right now. As I think you all know, or those of you who were on the commission last year, we lost multiple of our staff, and so we're pretty close to filling our last open position. So we're very happy about that. So with that, that'll conclude my comments.
Any commissioners have any final comments? Okay. Then this meeting will be adjourned to our September 28th meeting.